Hi, everybody. This is Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. June 24th, 2018, the 11th day of Tammuz, 5778. 3.5 years ago, a little under 3.5 years ago, I was incredibly privileged to interview Charles Krauthammer, whom I'm sure, as many of you know, passed away just a couple of days ago at the very young age of 68 from cancer. Brilliant columnist, political commentator, really a voice of reason, whom we need now more than ever. And so Ben Bresky, who's just the magician, found the interview, and we're going to play it for you now. So this is an interview from February 8th, 2015, of the late, great Charles Krauthammer. And I want to thank him for the truth and the honesty, and for his love of America and of Israel. And he will be greatly missed. So on to the interview. Charles Krauthammer from over 3 years ago. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. And very honored to have on the other side of the line now Dr. Charles Krauthammer, who's one of the few people that I probably don't even need to introduce. But writer, but columnist and conservative thinker, and just so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Krauthammer, for agreeing to this interview.
It's a pleasure.
So I know that you're very involved both in Israeli politics and American politics, and analysis of both. Just a few days ago, you wrote a column about anti-Semitism on the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and how it's alive and well. So perhaps you could give us a couple of minutes on your thinking there.
Well, I mean, I was struck, like the way everyone has been, by the irony of the resurgence of European anti-Semitism now 70 years after Auschwitz. And I had 2 points to make. One is that this is not something new. This is simply the anomaly, post-World War II anomaly, where anti-Semitism was considered gauche after the Holocaust. That anomaly is over. Europe is reverting to the norm. Mm-hmm. And there really is no future for European Jewry. There really wasn't after 1945. And if people haven't learned or seen it by now, when you get all these remarkable incidents spreading around the continent, I think it's rather clear that that episode in Jewish history, unfortunately, is over. The other point was that the inheritor of the role of central focus and fulcrum of Jewish history that had been European Jewries for 1,000 years has now gone to Israel, and Israel is the successor, inheritor of that role. And it's very easy for people to shed tears for dead Jews, for the Holocaust. It's a very easy thing for people to support Holocaust remembrance. But it seems to me that what's far more important, and the ultimate reverence for the dead, is to support the living. And the living means Israel. And the irony, of course, terrible irony, is that Israel now is facing an enemy also pledging genocide and acquiring the means to carry it out. And we need to take that very seriously.
Would you support Israel doing whatever we needed to do in order to defend ourselves, even if it meant going against the American administration?
Well, actually, the official position of this administration in the U.S. is exactly that, although they don't really mean it. But the official position is that Israel has a right to defend itself. But everything this administration, the Obama administration, has done for the last 6 years has been to try, it's been far more aimed at stopping Israel from doing anything than it has been at actually preventing Iran from getting the bomb.
That's definitely the feeling here in Israel. And we're afraid we might have to go it alone.
Which would be a very difficult proposition for a small country very far away with limited refueling capacity. But obviously, if Israel has to do it, Israel will do it. The only question is, at what point do you decide that you cannot rely on the West? And Jews have, to their chagrin, discovered over the centuries that it's very hard to rely on others. In fact, the founding principle of Zionism is that period of dependence should come to an end, and the Jews have to be self-reliant.
Well, to put together what you just said about anti-Semitism, Europe kind of going back to the norm to some degree.
Yes.
There are many people who say that what's going on, the criticism vis-a-vis Israel, is not anti-Semitism. It's directed at a body politic, at a country that's making decisions that are bad, that are subjugating another people. And to say that it's anti-Semitism is not right. But to put together what you're saying, the fact that there are Jews in Israel who can defend themselves, if really where the world is coming from, or the Western world is coming from, is still kind of an undercurrent of anti-Semitism, then maybe it tragically does make sense, some of the statements and actions that Israel does hear from countries who ostensibly should be our allies and doing whatever they can to help us protect ourselves, because at least it's clear to us here in Israel, and I don't know if it's clear to all Americans, that the dangers that Israel faces are the dangers that the entire West are going to be facing the day after. Do you think that Americans don't understand that?
Many Americans do. I'd say a majority of Congress does. A huge constituency of American Christians, particularly evangelicals, believe that fervently.
Mm-hmm.
The only person who doesn't seem to believe it, or at least is acting as if Israel is some kind of adversary rather than ally, unfortunately, is Barack Obama. There was actually a meeting, a high-level meeting, I believe, of the National Security Council staff with Muslim Brotherhood members from Egypt, which is a real slap in the face at another one of our allies. It seems to me that Obama's intent is to go down in history as the man who he did the Nixon to China with Iran, which I believe is a complete fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow, by granting it a nuclear infrastructure, he will enlist its help in taming the fires of the Middle East, which I think is truly a delusional idea, but I think that is his intent, and he's going to do whatever it takes to bring an agreement that at least gives the impression that he's achieved that.
And then this little people will pay for the fact that he's probably wrong down the line.
Well, that's the way it usually is in history.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Now, as a very, very successful columnist and author, your book, Things That Matter, has sold over 1 million copies, been on the New York Times bestseller list. It seems that you're doing the maximum that you as an individual can do to try and wake people up to the realities. Is there something more that you would like to do, given the opportunity?
Well, this has been one of the things I've been concerned about, one of the major concerns I've had for all my life. In fact, in the book, of which there are about, I think, 17 chapters or so, which it's a collection of my writings, so it covers just about every subject, domestic and foreign, and a lot of things that aren't political at all. About half the book is non-political. But there are more. There's a whole chapter of about, I think, 6 or 7 essays or columns on Israel and Zionism. More than anything else, I know something about it, and I care about it. And the other thing is, which I think is rather tragic, is my point of view, which is a defense of Zionism, used to be the norm in American commentary.
Mm-hmm.
You go back 30, 40 years, what I'm saying would have been considered rather conventional. Today, I'm one of the very few. The conventional view is this trendy either anti-Zionism or post-Zionism. And I'm one of the last, and that to me is very regrettable. There used to be William Safire, Abe Rosenthal. There was a whole cadre of people who were very strongly pro-Israel, and it would make the case. And I'm not sure why, but there are very few left. Part of it is sheer ignorance on the part of the press. I think there's just very little knowledge of Jewish history, history of Zionism, history of Israel, who did what to whom at what point, how Israel came into possession of the territories. Those kinds of questions I think most of my younger colleagues have no idea about. They don't even know about 2000 in Camp David. And when that recent history is so unknown, then you get to the point where you wonder if anybody can write in a convincing and fair way about it.
It also seems to have become somewhat of a partisan issue, that it's hard to find a Democrat who will publicly express support for Israel now. And that certainly has changed. No?
No, that's something of an exaggeration. I think the Democrats are, it is true that the more let's say the more isolationist sentiments are the ones that are more critical of Israel, are to be found more on the Democratic side than the Republican side. Although you do have some Republicans who simply are less interested in any support of any allies. But no, I think the vast majority of Democrats remain pro-Israel, and in fact, in the attempt to get a trigger for sanctions for Iran, if it does not give up its nuclear program, or at least there were 10 Democratic senatorial signatories already on that, several others who supported it in committee. They don't want to go against their president,
right?
But so that there are institutional or party reasons that are restraining them. But on a free vote, and if the president had a different policy, I think you'd find that there's very strong support for Israel.
That's tremendously gratifying to hear. Do you think that the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's visit to Washington is going to change anything?
Well, it certainly made a big ruckus here.
Right.
I think far more than it deserves. I don't know that it will change minds. The administration is absolutely intent on this so-called historic entente that it's trying to get with Iran. It seems to me want to make history. It just unilaterally, President just unilaterally announced the normalization of relations with Cuba, so he wants to lay down his markers. He no longer controls Congress, so he can't get any legislation through. So the place where a president can act in his last 2 years in these circumstances is foreign policy. So he's very intent on achieving that. I don't think the visit by Bibi will change that in any way. If anything, it will sort of harden them in their position. But I do think it's important for a world, Americans and the world, to hear the case. What's at stake? What exactly is going on? I don't know that maybe we'll go into details, but anybody who's been following these negotiations has to be mortified by how much the administration has already given away in advance, and wonder whether any outcome, given the concessions we have already made, is going to be a favorable one. So I think he'll be stating the case, and I think that will be in and of itself a good thing. Politically, it probably has damaged him. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Israeli politics. It can work both ways internally in Israel. But here, I don't think it's damaged him among some elites, but the elites here are fairly predisposed to oppose Bibi. The word Likud is considered a dirty word. Anyway, so I don't think that changes things. But I think in terms of American public opinion, I think people admire his courage and his forthrightness in defending himself and defending the freedom in that part of the world. I think he's fairly popular in that way, and he'll have a test of that popularity when he gives his speech.
Yeah, and he doesn't have an easy job. One last question on a slightly different direction. Do you think that the fact that America is now going to be an energy exporter, but certainly is not going to be as dependent on as it has been in the last century on fossil fuels and on the Persian Gulf and on Arab countries, Do you think that at some point that will also impact the foreign policy, that perhaps it is to some degree some intimidation or connection with Saudi Arabia, but not only, that is dictated where the State Department has gone, and perhaps now this will give some kind of an opening for something a little different?
Oh, I do. I think so, absolutely. I think there are two major tectonic changes that have occurred that for the long run really bode well for Israel. And that's why, however grim things look in the short run, and unfortunately for Israel, they generally always look grim in the short run, and yet Israel seems to make it through every short run, which is extremely gratifying and makes you rather hopeful. Mm-hmm. But for the longer run, yes, these are two major developments. Number one is the fact that America is becoming an energy superpower and will soon be exporting oil. That's just the prohibition is a anachronistic 1970s law that will soon be swept away because it makes no sense. But it'll be a major player. It'll have an effect on, of course, reducing our dependence, but also, for example, we start exporting natural gas, reducing Europe's dependence on Russia. So that will be number one, less dependence by the U.S., less fear of an embargo, less being swayed by those considerations in considering Middle Eastern policy. But the second one, even more ironic, is that the Gulf states themselves are becoming de facto, if not allies, but de facto sort of on the same side of history as the Israelis. They are facing Iran. They have a common enemy. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel ever were to attack Iran. It would turn out that it flew over Saudi airspace. Mm-hmm. It's hard to figure how else it would go, and I'm sure the Saudis would be enthusiastic in allowing that to happen. So you've got a confluence of interest between Egypt, at least under the current regime, the Saudis and the Gulf states, and Israel, in a way that we haven't seen before. They, of course, will give lip service to the Palestinian issue, but they know that they have an existential crisis, the Gulf states, that is. And many Egyptians feel that with radical Islam, and whether it's Sunni or Shiite, and the Shiite variety, of course, is represented and championed by Iran. So they would be, even without America achieving energy supremacy in some ways, or energy independence, there'd be less pressure from the oil-producing Arab states to run for anti-Israel policy, because Israel is a de facto ally, even though they would never say so.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yes, the strangest bedfellows.
If you're an Israeli, you take your friends where you can find them.
Yeah, nobody dies of boredom.
You don't get too choosy.
No, we absolutely don't. Islamic State and running after many of the journalists. I mean, as a human being, but also as a journalist. Any thoughts on that? On the United States not negotiating? Some of the European states do negotiate.
Well, that's, the negotiating thing. There really are no rules, as the Israelis know to their chagrin. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You give 1,000 for one for Shalit.
Right.
On the other hand, you storm the Ma'alot schoolhouse and lost so many children. Mm-hmm. So you've got these terrible dilemmas. There are no rules. No. I'm very sympathetic to whatever choice people make, because they're both impossible. Yeah. And that's because you're dealing with the worst human beings on earth. And when you're dealing with them, there's nothing but evil, and the choices are terrible, no matter which way you turn. So I don't particularly like the Europeans paying ransom. Mm-hmm. But, of course, if it were my child, I would pay double the ransom.
Of course.
Everybody knows that dilemma. Every Israeli knows. Look at the price you paid for Shalit.
Yeah.
But that's a choice one has to make. I mean, there are a lot of things and policies to be critical of. Generally, I tend not to be on that because it's such an impossible decision.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose what the best situation would be is not to get into that situation to begin with. And for the
yes, and you know that
Yes.
Every time you bargain, you're encouraging a future kidnapping.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, every human life is precious.
Mm-hmm. And as an Israeli and living here, we really, I know that I speak for many Israelis in feeling that to a great degree, we protect America. I know it's not always seen that way from the other side of the pond, but we really feel that we're at the forefront of what you said is the fight against evil, and evil that maybe going on here in the Middle East and taking on Israel, but definitely will not stop here. And that we all need to really band together before the world as a whole pays a huge and just devastating price, as we have.
40 years ago, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, later to become senator, was the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and he basically said that in one of his great speeches, where he basically said, "We're through trying to appease the Soviet third world anti-American majority. We're just going to speak the truth." Mm-hmm. And one of the truths he spoke is that Israel was under such savage and continual attack at the UN because it was the front line of freedom and the front line of the West. Mm-hmm. And it had to be recognized as that. So this goes back a long way.
And he probably would not be too happy to see the situation today. His words weren't heeded. Yeah. The whole context of Zionism is racism. He was a great man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles Krauthammer, for giving me a few minutes in your very precious schedule. Author of Things That Matter, over 1 million copies sold, New York Times bestseller list, and just so much more. We always all look forward to your columns. Well thought out, well reasoned, and just so right, just so cogent in so many ways. So thank you again, and I hope to have the honor of interviewing you again in the future.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that was Charles Krauthammer from 2015. Thank you all so much for listening, for tuning in to Rejuvenation, and take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Goodbye.